Today, we're going to continue my series on the question, what is faith? Today, we're going to hear from the Christian evangelist John Lennox. Here is John Lennox on what he regards as the meaning of faith.
The next problem is the nature of faith. Atheists have no faith, wrote Richard Dawkins, and then wrote a book on what he believes.
We're already dealing with an equivocation or package deal on the concept of belief. So Dawkins, whom I'm not going to defend here, I disagree with Dawkins on all sorts of things, but apparently Dawkins says, atheists have no faith, and then he writes a book on what he believes, and everybody gets a kick out of this in John Lennox's audience. Why? Because they are treating belief as the same thing as faith. But that is senseless, because the concept of belief is an umbrella concept that includes belief on the basis of evidence, which means you believe something on the basis of reason. Reason is the concept that captures the faculty that identifies and integrates the evidence or the material provided by the senses into concepts and generalizations and the like. That's what reason is. Or you can believe, still under the umbrella of belief, you can believe on the basis of no evidence or in defiance of the evidence. And for that kind of belief, we need another concept that's different from reason, and that concept is faith. So to say that Dawkins wrote a book on what he believes and to imply that that means that he has faith is to treat belief as a package deal that means both believing things on the basis of evidence and believing things on the basis of no evidence. But that's not a proper way to use the concept belief. If you say you believe something, you need to specify whether you believe it on the basis of evidence or on the basis of no evidence. Now, Lennox is going to go on here and tell us that he thinks that Christianity is evidence-based, and we'll talk about that as we get to it. But right off the bat, we all believe things. I believe that I'm having a conversation here speaking to my camera and speaking to you indirectly. And I believe all sorts of things, as do you. The question is, do we have evidence in support of those beliefs or not? If we do have evidence in support of them, then we believe them on the basis of reason.
Hitchens, our beliefs are not a belief, our faith is not a faith. What? But where does it come from? It comes from a subtle redefinition of the concept of faith that many people have bought into. Webster's Dictionary, new entry. Faith, noun, believing where there's no evidence.
Kudos to Webster for capturing the actual nature of faith and what faith actually means. The reason we need the concept of faith is because we need a concept to capture the action or the activity of people believing in ideas or existence, things like God, when there's no evidence to support the thing or the truth of the proposition. And that is what we need this concept for. If we didn't have instances of people doing that kind of thing, we just wouldn't need the concept of faith, because if you're always accepting ideas on the basis of evidence and logic, then reason does the work there. And there's no point in making reason and faith mean the same thing. That's just senseless.
That isn't faith, ladies and gentlemen, that's blind faith. Ordinary faith, fides, Latin, loyalty, trust, is a kind of thing that we all know about in our life. You know why you trust your friends.
Here is where Lennox is going to do what almost all religious professionals do, and that is try to equate faith with trust or confidence and try to make it sound like it's the thing you do all the time. You have trust or faith in your friends, and you have confidence or faith in your friends in all of these instances. You trust that the airplane is going to fly and so on. You trust the pilot. So why not trust God, right? This is where this is all going to go eventually. But that is not what faith means. And we don't need the concept of faith to replace the concept of trust, because we already have the concept of trust. And it doesn't matter what the etymology of faith is. The reason that we need it in language today is that we need a concept that captures the idea of accepting ideas in the absence of evidence. Lennox is trying to say that that's blind faith. Well, if we already have a concept for capturing or for accepting ideas on the basis of evidence and logic, reason, then why do we need two more concepts, faith and blind faith? We don't. We just need one more concept, and that is faith in this context, because we just need another concept to denote when people accept ideas when there's no evidence to support those ideas. So he's trying to have his cake and eat it too here.
Your bank manager will want to know why he can trust you to give you a loan or a mortgage. Everybody in the Western world knows what evidence-based faith means.
Everybody in the Western world knows on some level that when you are talking about accepting ideas on the basis of evidence, you are talking about reason. So don't let him use this kind of social pressure or argument from intimidation. Oh, like everyone knows this, you should accept it too. No, we don't all know that, because it's not true, and so no one knows it. I mean, some people might accept it and some people might profess it, but that doesn't make it so. Um, Accepting ideas on the basis of evidence is accepting them rationally. Accepting ideas on the basis of non-evidence is accepting them irrationally or on the basis of faith.
And you're a fool to believe something without any evidence. If I say I believe that or I trust that, the next logical question is why?
Good. That's very good. The next logical question, if you say I believe this or I believe that, the next logical question should be why. Now let's see where he goes with this.
On what basis? Now you see what's happened very subtly, led by Dawkins and others, is to redefine faith as a purely religious word, which it isn't, it's an ordinary word, meaning believing where there's no evidence. That is desperately wrong and dangerous. Now, I must speak as a Christian. Other religious traditions must rightly speak for themselves, but Christianity is an evidence-based faith. I can demonstrate that just in a moment. Because one of the central claims of, say, the Gospel of John is many other signs Jesus did that are not written in this book, but these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ.
So the evidence that he's citing here for believing from a Christian perspective in, I guess, God or having faith, is that in John, he says that many other signs that are not in this book have been given. So we're going to take the word of a guy in a book that was written 2,000 years ago, and that's going to be the grounds for accepting an idea as true. That's the evidence. A guy saying something in a book is not evidence, Mr. Lennox. It is a guy saying something in a book. I have thousands of books in my office, and all sorts of guys say things in those books. That doesn't make it so. This is not evidence. Evidence means that the idea or the argument ultimately reaches down to perceptual given, right? The perceptual self-evident, that is, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, right? It's the senses, or it's introspection. Like you can see by turning your mind inside your head, what's going on in your head. Oh, I'm feeling this, and here's why I'm feeling it, because I thought about that, right? You can do that thinking, and that's evidence too, is evidence of what's going on in your head. But the mere fact that someone said something in a book is not evidence to support God. And it's not the case that when we use the concept of faith, we mean trusting, what we're told in a book, unless that thing we're being told in the book is not supported in any way, shape, or form by actual evidence, in which case it is faith.
The Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name. In other words, here are the signs, the semeion, from which we get semiotics, the indicators on which faith is based. I wouldn't sit here for a microsecond if I didn't believe that my Christian faith is based on evidence.
Well, if your Christian faith is based on evidence, then you don't need your Christian faith. You're just saying that your Christianity is based on reason, observation, conceptual integration, and logic. Well, let's hear about the actual evidence that we can see with our eyes, and that integrates with our rational faculty and the laws of logic, like the law of non-contradiction and the law of causality. So things are what they are; they can't be what they're not, right? And things act in accordance with their identities, their natures, and they can't act in contradiction to their identities. So a snake can't talk. and water can't turn into wine. That's what it means for things to anchor in evidence and logic. And he is trying to claim that his Christianity is based on evidence and that evidence is a faith-based or that faith is an evidence-based way of knowing, and that is just nonsense, and it's literal nonsense. There's no sensory evidence to support the idea that we need a concept like faith to denote acceptance of ideas when there's evidence supporting them, because we already have a concept for that. That concept is reason.
That's one side of the story. But now we come to the other side. What this is confusion has caused is people overlook totally the fact that faith is essential to science.
He's going to argue that you have to trust that things are what they are in order to do science. But you don't need to trust that things are what they are. You know that things are what they are when you do science. And you know that by opening your eyes and observing reality and experiencing the world in which we live, where it is axiomatically obvious that, or it's axiomatically the case and self-evidently so, that things are what they are and act in accordance with their identities. We don't need faith to know that. We don't even need reason to know that. This is one of the foundations of reason. We become reasoning beings by beginning with the understanding that things are what they are and act in accordance with their identities. So again, he's trying to confuse here rather than to clarify, which is the MO of religious professionals.
Einstein once said, "I cannot imagine a real scientist without that faith."
Oh, now we're going to bring in Einstein, who says he cannot imagine a real scientist without faith. Well, I don't care what Einstein says, and you shouldn't either on this count. Einstein was not a philosopher, he was a physicist. And if he believed in God or had faith, that's his business. This is an argument from intimidation and an argument from authority all at once here by Lennox. He's saying, in effect, well, look, Einstein, this really smart guy, there's the argument from authority, he believed in this stuff. And if you don't believe in it like Einstein did, then you must not be very smart. And that's the argument from intimidation. And these kinds of arguments are packed into almost all arguments made by religious professionals.
Now, he didn't mean faith in God. He meant faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe. He meant that conviction that drove Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Clerk Maxwell, and so on.
We know that the universe is intelligible, which means that the laws of identity and causality hold. That's all the intelligibility of the universe means. We know that by opening our eyes, experiencing the world with our senses generally, and getting off the ground as toddlers. You know when you're a toddler and you roll your ball and it hits the wall and it stops at the wall, that the wall is acting like what it is, and the ball is acting like what it is, and you are acting like what you are. And when you and the wall and the ball do the things that you do in this interactive process, that everything acts like what it is. And you know that by direct experience, not by an act of faith. You know it because you experience the fact. And this is the foundation of knowledge is this connection of the mind and your experience to perceptual reality, and this is sort of where it begins. You do not need faith to know that the ball is not going to roll through the wall. That's not how you arrive at the conclusion that the ball is a ball and acts in accordance with its identity. You get that simply through experience. So this is the beginning of reasoning. It is not the beginning of faith.
They believed that the universe was intelligible because they believed in God. But leave God out of it. You cannot do science. You can't even start to do science without believing it can be done.
Well, you can't start to do science without believing that your mind works, because science is the application of reason to specific problems and areas of the world in which we live, to figuring out what things are and how they act and interact and what we can do with them. You do need to acknowledge that things are what they are and that they act in accordance with their identities. Absolutely, you need that to get science off the ground. But that is not an act of faith. That is an act of direct experience. and then conceptualizing that experience into things like the law of identity. A is A, the law of non-contradiction. A thing is what it is, or a thing is either A or non-A at the same at a given time and in a given respect. And the law of causality. A thing is what it is and acts in accordance with its identity. So that's the law of identity applied to action. So all of this is necessary to get off the ground in science, but none of it has anything to do with faith. So again, watch for the equivocations, the package deals, the arguments from intimidation, the arguments from authority, all the fallacies that get packed into these kinds of claims and so-called arguments.
That is your belief. Now, you give evidence for it, of course, but I was taught quantum physics by Professor Sir John Polkinghorne, and he reminds us in his books that physics is powerless to explain its faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe, for the simple reason that you have to believe that before you start. So here's the fascinating thing. People write me off, at least Dawkins does. I'm a man of faith, which means I believe where there's no evidence, but he's a man of faith. And this is illustrated brilliantly in my debate with Peter Singer, who's the world's most famous bioethicist from Princeton. I debated him in Australia. And I usually tell audiences that I have a worldview. My parents were Christians, so were my grandparents. And of course, I get written off because then my Christianity is Irish genetics, full stop. Well, okay, I was honest about that and can discuss that if you want to question it. And Peter Singer stood up and he said, well, there goes my biggest objection to all religion. People just stay in the faith in which they were brought up, you see. So I thought this is going to be very interesting. So when I had a chance to speak, I said, Peter, I told them about my background, that I first met my worldview from my parents who lived it, and then I tested it in all kinds of other ways later. But what about you? Were your parents atheists? He said, yes, they were. Oh, I said, that's very interesting. You have stayed in the faith in which you were brought up. Oh, but he said, it isn't a faith. Oh, I said, Peter, I'm desperately sorry. I was under the impression you believed it.
So here again, we have this equivocation on the word belief. Belief is being used simultaneously in this argument to mean acceptance of ideas on the basis of evidence and acceptance of ideas in the absence of evidence. And they're not the same thing. So I'm certainly not going to defend Peter Singer. I think he's a monstrous philosopher. He's got horrible ideas. But if his position was that the reason I'm an atheist is that there's no evidence for God, so he's going on the basis of evidence being a requirement for accepting ideas, that is very different than someone saying, well, I believe in God, even though there is no evidence for him. These are different kinds of belief. One is a belief in which the believer is saying, look, I'm only going to accept things as true. That's what belief is, the acceptance of something as true, some idea as true, or some existent as actually existing. And if you accept it on the basis of evidence, if you believe it on the basis of evidence, that is rational belief. If you believe it on the basis of non-evidence, then that is irrational belief, aka faith. So Lennox here gets a lot of mileage with his audience, of course, because they've already bought into his ideas, so they're loving these equivocations and these package deals that Lennox is using, because it enables them to pretend that all belief, whether on the basis of evidence or not, is the same, and that when they use the term belief for themselves, they mean on the basis of evidence, but then if you ask them for the evidence, they can't supply it. And then when they talk about doing physics, you have to believe in the uniformity of nature. When there's no evidence for that, they're going to claim. So that's supposedly faith. And in this case, they're using faith as the correct definition, at least in the way that they're trying to get over with this, because they're saying that the physicists believe in the uniformity of nature when there's no evidence for the uniformity of nature. Of course, there is evidence for actually, it's not even evidence for the uniformity of nature. It's self-evidency for the uniformity of nature. It's stronger than evidence. It's the foundation of evidence. It's what evidence comes down to, is that you can see and experience the fact that things are what they are. So Lennox he's pretty good at this as an orator because he's very good at being funny and telling stories. And I think he probably sucks a lot of people up into this whirlwind of nonsense that he creates with these word salads. So again, you really have to keep your eye on what these guys are doing and how they're using words.
Now, cyberspace went wild because he was one of the world's leading philosophers that doesn't recognize his atheism as a belief system.
One of the world's leading philosophers who doesn't recognize his atheism as a belief system. Well, first of all, atheism isn't even a system. Atheism is a single belief. Actually, it's a single lack of belief. It's a lack of belief in God. And that's all there is to atheism. There's no more to it. Atheism is almost an inconsequential idea because it tells you nothing about what a person does believe. So it's really a negative. It's certainly not a system. And in any event, one's belief, if it's a belief based on evidence or at least on the requirement of evidence to accept ideas as true, is very different from a belief in the absence of evidence, which is precisely what religionists do in their belief in God and encourage you to do, even though they make the water very muddy in the process of trying to get you to buy into this. And they muddy the waters with all these package deals and equivocations.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's serious. And it's come about by this redefinition of faith. Real faith is not blind faith. It's a commitment, either to facts or people, or all kinds of other things based on evidence.
Commitments to facts and people based on evidence is not what gives rise to the need of the concept of faith. We already have a concept that denotes when you are committed to ideas or to accepting ideas or to the existence of a thing, be it a person or your mind or satellites or anything else. When there's evidence to support these things, you accept them on the basis of reason. When there's no evidence to support them, reason tells you not to accept the ideas or the existence as being real. Faith tells you that you can and should accept them if God, allegedly, or the preachers or the representatives of God here on earth tell you to, basically is what it comes down to. So again, all of this is just a whole bunch of fallacies. It's just like a long string of fallacies that get woven together into this story. And unfortunately, this stuff gets used not only on adults, it gets used on children and gets them to buy into these cults, which is what religions are. And it's very destructive. It's destructive to their psychologies. It's destructive to their ideas of morality. The kids end up buying into this nonsense that Jesus died for you on a cross and sacrifice is the highest virtue, and you should live this way. Look, try to be like Jesus and Mother Teresa because they're really, really moral people because they sacrificed and gave up their values for others. This is really destructive stuff. And the way they get people to buy into the nonsense is largely by trying to get them to believe that faith is not acceptance of ideas in the absence of evidence, but also to then use faith to get people to accept ideas in the absence of evidence. So that's why they do this in the form of creating package deals and equivocating all the way through these arguments. And it's really nefarious.
And it's only as strong and viable as the evidence that stands behind it. But it's absolutely essential to science.
So there you have it. John Lennox trying to get away with the idea that faith simply means, trust and going by evidence and the like. Why wouldn't you buy into that? And then later he's going to use these very ideas, the idea of faith, as meaning that you need to accept God and God's word and all the stuff that religion tells you on the basis of what? Of evidence? No, they're not going to provide evidence that God exists or that his word is the moral law or anything of the sort. You're going to have to accept that stuff in the absence of evidence. So they get you to buy into faith by thinking that it just means trust and evidence-based belief, and then they use the idea of faith in the actual sense of the term to get you to believe in things for which there is no evidence. So you have to pay attention to what these guys are doing. In my view, it's extremely nefarious. It's extremely evil because it's trying to convince people that their minds are inefficacious and that they should capitulate and just give up their minds to an alleged God. Anyway, that's it for today's episode of Understanding. We'll look at a few more instances of professional philosophers and theologians claiming faith is this, that, or the other. And until then, keep using your mind and loving your life.